What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and I'm wearing the green hat today because we're talking about the Green Death Guard. It is officially the first day of Grotsmas. Games Workshop is releasing new detachments for Warhammer 40k every single day in the month of December up until Christmas. So we're going to get a ton of new content to talk about, and I want to talk about all of it. So that's what I'm going to commit to do, making a video about every single new Grotsmas detachment. We're going to break it down, talk about its strengths and weaknesses, some ways to play it, and I'm going to build a list for each one of them, as long as people keep watching. So like and subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff, get all your friends to watch all these videos, and if I have time and the inclination, I will also play a game with that detachment after the video goes live over on Twitch as well. So stay tuned for that. Go ahead and give me a follow over on my Twitch channel, and let's dive into this first one, the Fly-Blown Host. Now, this is a Death Guard infantry-focused detachment, which is a nice differentiation from the current incarnation of Death Guard, which very much heavily focuses on feted blow drones and predator destructors and all of these ranged and sometimes melee-oriented vehicles. We have seen a slight slide towards infantry, especially with the newly discounted cost of things like Death Shroud Terminators, and those are going to be great in this detachment. So what does it do? First off, it gives all of your Death Guard infantry that are not embarked within a transport the Scout's 5-inch and Stealth abilities. So, at the beginning of the game, after you determine the player who goes first, that first player will move all of their Scout units, their Scout distance, in any direction. This is huge because it basically gives you an additional movement phase before the game begins to reposition your units or to get additional threat range up the table. That's especially big for Death Guard infantry, which tend to be relatively slow. So this is just increasing your threat range and your ability to take table space on turn 1. Stealth is also an enormous buff here because you're compounding additional defensive mechanics on top of these already tanky infantry. And as we'll talk about later, there are going to be some ways to make your infantry ridiculously hard to kill. Now, an important thing to keep in mind is what you're going to lose in Death Guard from moving out of the normal Plague Company. You are losing the objective secure ability that the detachment ability in that other detachment gives you, and you also lose the additional effects of Contagions of Nurgle. So in Plague Company, currently you can choose things like -1 weapon skill, ballistic skill, -1 save characteristic to enemies within that contagion range, and you can't do that if you swap into this Fly-Blown Host. So that's an important piece of arithmetic to keep in mind if you're considering changing it into this detachment. Now, what are the enhancements in the detachment? First off, any of these besides Rejuvenating Swarm, interestingly, affect the bearer's unit, but they don't require you to join a unit. This is the best wording of these style of abilities because they allow you to use them on a character that is either independent or a part of a unit, and you get the same effect either way. Droning Chorus, for example, gives you assault on all of the ranged weapons equipped by models in the bearer's unit, so that will affect both the character and the unit it's attached to. Insectile Murmuration gives you reroll wound rolls of 1 against enemies in contagion range of a unit in your army. Importantly, that works on anything in contagion range of one of your units, not just contagion range of the infantry unit itself. So you can use something like an Icon Bearer or a Hellbrute to inflict contagion on someone and then benefit from the reroll 1s. Rejuvenating Swarm is a really interesting one. It is the points filler enhancement, so it only costs you 10 points, and it regenerates all of your wounds at the end of each phase. So if your opponent ever goes in and tries to kill that character and fails, you get all your wounds back, which is super nice. It is important that that's infantry only. You can't put it on something tanky like a Demon Prince. The best you can do is like a 6-wound character, I think. But given that Death Guard characters are already relatively tough, you're also going to get the effect of Stealth, for example, from this detachment. It's probably not that bad of an enhancement to begin with. Plague Veil is a 25.1. This one is huge. While the Bearer's unit is within range of 1 or more objective markers you control, that unit can only be selected as the target of a ranged attack if the attacking model is within 18 inches. So this is essentially an ape of Bellacor's defensive aura in Chaos Demons. It restricts the range of all your opponent's weapons to 18 when targeting that unit. Essentially, you can't select them as a target if you're not within that range. There are some idiosyncrasies to this. It measures the distance between the attacking model and the target unit, not the distance that you're measuring for your ranged weapon. So there are instances where you can still attack the unit even if the model you're targeting is not within 18. It also works on a model per model basis. So if some of your opponent's models are within 18 of you, they can shoot you. If the other ones in the unit can select a different target if they have one. This is huge though because it has the potential to keep you safe if you play kind of conservatively on turn 1. You can string a unit out, put one model within range of your home objective, for example, There's a bunch of different units that I think this is going to be really good on. Things like Death Shroud Terminators are really interesting to me because they're a melee unit that doesn't want to get shot on its way in. Blightlord Terminators come in larger units and usually have some non-special models they can trail back to your objectives to keep themselves safe. So that's another really good place I think this is going to be put in. Now, with that out of the way, let's discuss some stratagems. The first one we have is Nauseating Paroxysms. This is used at the start of the fight phase and forces an enemy within engagement range of one of your infantry units to take a battle shock test with -1. This one is totally fine. It is any fight phase, yours or your opponent's, so that timing is really important because you can potentially battle shock enemies in their own fight phase, which then causes them to be OC0 when it comes back to your turn, so you can take objectives from them, for example. You can also use it to make them OC0 at the end of your turn, just to score things like Storm Hostile Objective if you really need to. This feels like it's a little bit of a vanity spend sometimes. There are going to be situations where you really need something to be battle shocked and it gives you a Hail Mary at the end of the game, but most of the time you're going to be using it to do those things like flip objectives or give yourself the chance to flip objectives or stop your opponent from using stratagems on that unit in these rare instances where you need to at the start of the fight phase. Still a great stratagem to have in the chamber, but it is kind of restrictive on its targeting, and it's forcing your opponent to fail a battle shock check, which is, they'll always pass, basically, as soon as you use them. So it's nice, but not particularly huge. Vermin Cloud is a similar one. It's used in the fight phase and on a Death Guard infantry unit that hasn't yet fought. It gives them a 6-inch pile-in and consolidate. So this is going to be for those situations where you're trying to string a big unit back to an objective, or you've contorted yourself into a weird position, or you're just trying to get more OC onto an objective. That 6-inch pile-in consolidate's huge. There are some interesting ways you can use this. You can kind of like use it to juke combat movement, where you can charge a unit but get some of your models that don't have to base close to another enemy unit, then use Vermin Cloud to pile in 6 inches into a new unit, for example. So having stratagems like these are super useful. It's not usable in every situation, but it does give you a ton of options in the fight phase. And especially large units, things like Poxwalkers, for example, that can be taken on up to 20, are going to be hugely benefited from these. Eye of the Swarm is the next one. It's used in your shooting phase and gives your ranged weapons on an infantry unit pistol, so you can fire them in melee. Interestingly, you can also use it to ignore the -1 penalty for firing into enemy monsters and vehicles that are in melee. Less useful, but certainly nice. I don't know how often you're going to use this, but I do think that one of the big pushes of this detachment are Blightlord Terminators, and being able to use their weapons while you're engaged, shooting at the unit engaging you, is a nice quality of life improvement. Droning Horror is the next one. It gives you reroll hit rolls of 1 in your shooting phase on a Death Guard infantry unit. If you target an enemy within half range, you can reroll the hit roll instead. Now, again, I think this is a big boost for Blightlord Terminators. You can attach things like Lords of Virulence to them to give them wound rerolls. You can also use it on things like Plague Marines with an attached Biologus Putrefire, so they have 5+ lethal hits and target an enemy unit within half range, and then you can reroll to try to fish for those lethal hits. That's also a huge buff as well. There are obviously a lot of ways to use this, but generally hit rerolls are just great, so you're always going to want to be able to windmill slam this down if you're trying to shoot with these big bricks of Death Guard infantry. Enervating Onslaught is the next one. This is a charge phase stratagem that essentially tank shocks a target being charged by a Death Guard infantry unit. Interestingly, this can be used on any infantry, so things like cultists and poxwalkers can also use this. You roll a d6 for each model in engagement range of an enemy unit that you charged. For every 5 up you roll, adding 1 if you are a Space Marine, so not a poxwalker or a cultist, you do a mortal wound. This is just great to have, especially if you need to chip units down to get them to a point where you can kill them efficiently with your combat profile, especially because you can sort of combo it with a regular grenade too. You can actually be inflicting a ton of mortal wounds when you're near your opponent. Say, for example, you have a Plague Marine unit, throw a grenade and do 3 or 4 mortal wounds, and then charge and get 6 or 7 models in melee. You're probably going to do another 3 or 4 mortal wounds with that as well. You've already done 6 mortal wounds. It is 2 CP, but before you even go any farther, you've already done a bunch of damage to them. Mephitic Invigoration is the last stratagem, also used on a Death Guard infantry unit, but this one has to be within 6 inches of 1 or more friendly Mephitic Blight Haulers. Kind of random, to be honest, but it seems like they are trying to push the Mephitic Blight Hauler as well as the infantry. I guess they have a lot of Mephitic Blight Haulers sitting around in the warehouse there. Mephitic Blight Haulers are good in and of themselves, to be fair. I don't think that there's any reason that you would be sad to take them. They're basically a ranged anti-tank version of a Fetid Bloat Drone. They have +1 to wound against enemy monsters and vehicles, so they're just good at shooting big stuff. It's not bad at all. And it gives you a bodyguard style of effect. If you're targeted by a ranged attack, if the strength characteristic of the attack is greater than the toughness of your unit, you get -1 to be wounded. This is basically just the Death Shroud Terminator rule, but you can use it on anything as long as the Blight Hauler is nearby you. Especially if you're trying to tank out your infantry, which I think this detachment's going to be doing a lot of. It's probably a pretty good idea to include at least one Mephitic Blight Hauler just to be able to use this stratagem, because it does seem incredibly strong, especially if you're trying to keep safe big tanky units of Blightlord Terminators or something. All right, so let's build a list around the Fly-Blown Host. Big thanks to New Recruit, by the way, though, for being awesome and easy to build lists with, which is what we're using today. Now, I've actually built something that's very similar to a list that we actually saw at the World Championships of Warhammer. I have a whole video on interesting lists in that event where I talk about this list that was basically a brick of Death Guard Terminators built around a Death Guard Demon Prince. Now, the Demon Prince doesn't itself have that much synergy inside the Fly-Blown Host detachment on its own. He's not an infantry model. He's not an infantry character, so he can't be targeted by any of the stratagems, and he can't receive any of the enhancements, which obviously is a big downside. The upside, however, is that he does project a 6+ feel no pain to all your infantry. And when you're comboing that with additional defensive effects, things like stealth and potentially -1 damage while you're in melee, that can make things like Blightlord Terminators ridiculously difficult to kill for their points value. Not only that, but they're also going to be fast. Well, faster than normal, I guess, thanks to that 5-inch scout. So you can project 20 Blightlord Terminators up the table and then also have the resilience to deliver them. Obviously, all these Terminators deep strike, so there are going to be interesting ways to deliver them elsewhere too. So let's talk about the list real quick here. We do have the Foot Demon Prince here as the army's warlord. He's just a big tough to kill guy who's going to give that 6+ feel no pain to all your infantry. He also acts as a bit of a good late game punch. He's pretty okay in melee, especially once you've contagioned your enemy. We have 2 Terminator sorcerers. Now I have for clarity here, I have just built this in a Plague Host, and so I'm proxying the enhancements with enhancements of the same cost from Plague Host, so this list on the screen is not entirely perfect. So I have one of them with the 20-point enhancement Insectile Murmuration. Now these are both going to ideally jump into Death Shroud Terminator units. That turns on the Death Shroud Terminator's defensive effect for having been joined by a character, so they have that transhuman effect essentially built in. That Insectile Murmuration gives them reroll wounds of 1 if they target an enemy in contagion. Importantly, that affects literally all their attack, not just their ranged attacks. So if they're shooting with their anti-infantry weapons, they're getting that wound reroll with the gun, and then also they'll get into melee. So they become fairly efficient, which is very nice. Plus, the sorcerer can give them -1 damage in melee as well, which is also great. Another interesting place for the Terminator, or maybe potentially some of the other Terminator characters, is Rejuvenating Swarm, and just using them as a singleton unit that's kind of hard to kill. The sorcerers are only 5 wounds, but you can take things like Lords of Contagion or Lords of Virulence that are 6 wounds and are a little bit tougher to kill, and then if your opponent fails to kill them, they're just a Beast of Nurgle, they come back to full. That's also a pretty interesting thing I definitely toyed with, but I think we're going with the Terminator brick theme right now. So we have 2 of those Terminator sorcerers. One of them gets the wound rerolls. The other one's just a bear. And then we have 2 Lords of Virulence. So the Lord of Virulence gives you wound rerolls with your ranged attacks. These guys are going to be jumping into Blightlord Terminator units. And as I said before, we can also trigger hit rerolls if you attack enemies that are close to you with the stratagem Droning Horror. So theoretically, these Lord of Virulence units are getting full hit and wound rerolls. Now, one of them is rocking the 15-point upgrade Droning Chorus. So those guys are going to get assault on all their ranged weapons. Pretty solid. It makes them move faster up the table, able to get their combi weapons into range more quickly. Just generally pretty good. Also only 15 points, so that's great. The other one has the big 25-point enhancement, the Plague Veil. So these guys can't be attacked if you're in an objective, touching your objective you control. Only one model in the unit has to touch that objective. If he does so, no enemies can attack them from outside 18 inches. So this is huge on the first turn. The other unit, you might be able to do like a cheeky Rapid Ingress and then use your assault to run up and get into range of your opponent. This one, you want to scout, like to basically deploy on the line, scout 5 inches forward and tow one guy onto your back objective. It's an 11 model unit with the Lord of Virulence in there, so they're huge. And suddenly they restrict most of the enemy army from being able to attack you. If you go too far forward, obviously most of the enemy can attack you. But the other benefit that you're getting is that forces your opponent to come closer to you, which I think most armies don't really want to do. in this case. To attach in there, we have 2 units of 10 Blightlord Terminators. We also have the 2 units of Death Shroud Terminators. The Blightlord Terminators, I have equipped with combi weapons, not the standard combi bolter. That's largely because you're getting wound rerolls from the Lord of Virulence, so you have a pretty good chance of triggering devastating wounds, especially once you add in 2 Reaper autocannons. We also have a couple of Plague Spears and Flows of Corruption in there to help us at short range too. And the Lord of Virulence definitely isn't, he's no slouch. He's a Twin Lane Flamer on top of that, and he also has a Power Fist. So the potential damage from this unit is pretty impressive. We then have 2 units of 10 Death Guard Cultists just to be utility units. These guys already have Scout, so you could maybe add like Poxwalkers in here if you wanted something tougher, but the Cultists are just fine. I think there's a lot of swapping you can do. In order to ensure that we have access to that stratagem Mephitic Invigoration, I have 2 Mephitic Blight Haulers. They also give the list a little bit more long-range punch. Your opponent can't just like deploy out in the open and do whatever they want, because you have the potential to just like pound a couple of long-range +1 to wound missiles into them if they do that. And then on turn 1, obviously, you can pay the CP, make your guys -1 to be wounded from big enemy guns into these big Blightlord Terminator units. And that's the list I came up with. Now, obviously, I don't think it's the only list you could play, and I think there is a lot of swaps available to this one. You could take something like Typhus if you also wanted -1 to be hit in melee, in addition to just the ranged attacks. And I also think that there's definitely a place to play like a Horde style, where you're taking a lot of Poxwalkers with that stealth, with those mortal wounds they do on the charge in this detachment. I also think Plague Marines, the more I think about it, the more I think I like Plague Marines too. You could potentially do something like combo attach a Tallyman and a Biologus Putrefier to give yourself +1 to hit, then, and also the 5+ lethal hits, and then use the rerolls to try to fish for those. So that's like kind of an interesting range combo you could try to do. It is expensive, so I don't know how exciting it is, and they're not that hard to kill, even with all the buffs, but it is the detachment to try it in if you are trying to make these guys tough to kill. But this one in particular, we have these Blightlord Terminators sitting at -1 to be hit, potentially, if you have the stratagem active, -1 to be wounded, and a 6+ feel no pain on a 2+, 4+ model in cover that's only 31 points a model. That's ridiculously difficult to kill, if you can even get in range to attack them, which is huge. And then once you get close and they start hitting you, they got all those hit and wound rerolls with their ranged attacks. They're coming in and doing mortal wounds on the charge, and then punching you with those Plague Flails. And not to mention, there's 12 Death Shroud Terminators with attached sorcerers that are also going to hit you too. So tons and tons of melee counterpunch from there too. So let me know down in the comment section what you think about this detachment and what you think about the list that I built with it. I am really excited for these new detachments, because it seems like what the designers are trying to do is push unit archetypes that aren't really played as much in that faction. In specific, it's Blightlord Terminators and Blight Haulers for this one, and I'm really curious to see what they start to do with some of the other factions with units and unit types that aren't really played there very much. I really hope that they continue that trend. I think it sounds amazing, and I think this is a strong start to these new detachments. This one doesn't seem super overpowered. I'm sure there are going to be some ones that are super duper good, but it seems solidly playable. There's a lot of really good combos in here, and I'm really excited to see it on the table. So thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All your people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.